Hi everyone, Suzanne here. I hope you're all well and welcome to Sew Custom. Today's video is going to be the making of this little number. So if you're interested in seeing that, then let's get started.
Starting with the fabric, this is a viscose jersey fabric. It has stretch in both directions and it's in this lovely stripe design. And on to the cutting out. This is my back. I have one layer of fabric underneath this pattern piece, and I'm cutting all of my pattern pieces out on a single layer. And I'm doing this because I want to create somewhat of a chevron effect on the bodice and the skirt. So that's what I'm doing here. So I'm just lining up the cut piece on top of some fresh fabric and ensuring that the diagonal lines match up. Once I'm happy that they do match up, I'm just pinning along those lines, cutting away that excess fabric, and once complete, this is how it looks. So I have that really nice chevron effect that I'm after. So super happy with that. So here I'm just laying one back over the other, right sides together, matching up those diagonal lines, pinning, and ready to stitch. And stitching here at my 1 centimeter seam allowance, back stitching at the start, back stitching at the end, taking it nice and gently over those stripes. And that's how that looks. So all matched up, super happy with that. So off camera, I've just tidied up that edge on the overlocker and pressed it. And now I'm ready to stabilize the neck, which is what I'm doing here. So I have some stretch tape and I'm just placing it around the neck and pressing it into place. This is just going to help the neckline not stretch out too much. Trimming off the excess. That's that done. So I'm setting the back to the side for a second to work on the front. So I have a few notches here on this pattern piece, all of which will help me out when I'm creating the twist, which you'll see in a second. So that's one side of my bodice cut out. And here I'm just doing exactly the same as I did on the back. I'm laying that cut piece on top of some fresh fabric, making sure all the stripes match up, and cutting out, and this is what I get. So happy with that. And now just to do the same thing to the front neck as I did on the back. So just to add some stabilizing tape. So that's that done. So now I just need to finish off my edges between those notches. This will just help create a super neat finish in and around the twist. So I finished my edges on both bodice pieces. And now I'm just lining up one bodice over the other, right sides together, and pinning in between those notches, ready to sew. So stitching here at my 1 centimeter seam allowance, starting at one notch and finishing at the other, back stitching at the start and the end. So that's my first little piece done, and now for the second. Same thing here, back stitching at the start, back stitching at the end. So that's how that looks. And off camera, I'll give those a nice press. And that's how they look. Nice and neat. So now for my ties. So I'm just lining up right sides together, the long edge of my tie, and pinning. And I'm making sure when I pin that my last pin right at the center is right on those notches. So the pin I'm placing here, this will make sure that everything is super neat at that little join. So just pinning the rest of the long edge. And I'm going to stitch from one side of the tie to the center, back stitch, and then do the same thing on the other side. So stitching at my 1 centimeter seam allowance, back stitching, trying to be nice and accurate when I come to those notches in the center, making sure my last stitch is right on those notches. And I think I've managed to do it on the first side, so now for the second. So back stitching at the start, coming up to the center, going nice and gently, making sure that that last stitch is right at those notches. And again, I think I've managed to do it here. So now just pulling the ties through right side out. And hopefully all those joins in the center are all matched up. So I've just given the whole thing a nice press, and you can see that that little join in the center is super neat and tidy. I am very pleased with this. So now just to take care of the end of my ties. So I'm just lining up the notch that you see me snip earlier with that seam that I've just sewn and just tacking those ends together. This will just help me out later on when I attach the ties to the side seam. So that's that done. And here I'm ready to join my back to my front at the shoulders. So just laying my back over my front right sides together, lining up my shoulder seams and pinning, and ready to stitch. So back stitching at the start at my 1 centimeter seam allowance and back stitching at the end. So that's how that looks. And off camera I've just tidied up that edge on the overlocker and given it a nice press. So at this stage I'm ready to tackle my neckline. So I've chosen to finish the neckline with a little bit of piping. So this is just a strip of the outer fabric that's just over a couple of centimeters wide. I've pressed it along its length, lining it up with the edge of my neckline and stitching. Back stitching at the start, trying to keep those edges lined up the whole way around the neckline, taking it nice and gently and back stitching at the end. So that's how that looks. And off camera I've just tidied up that edge on the overlocker again, given it a nice press, and now I'm ready to top stitch. So I'm just going to run a stitch line just where you see me point to here, so just on the edge of that flat piping, back stitching at the start. I'm just about 1 millimeter or 2 away from the edge of the piping. This is just going to help everything to lie nice and flat along the neck. Back stitching at the end. So that's how that looks. And again, off camera, I've given that a nice press. And now I'm ready for the skirt. So I'm setting my bodice to the side for a second. So this is my front skirt, one side, and I cut the second side out in exactly the same way as I did the bodice. So I have that nice chevron effect you can see here. And then just lining up that center front seam and pinning, and ready to stitch. Back stitching, taking it nice and easy the whole way down that center front seam, trying to make sure that all of those chevrons are matched up the whole way down. Back stitching at the end, and that's how that looks. So just to tidy up that edge and give it a nice press, which I've done here. So I'm super happy with how this has turned out. And now same thing again for the back skirt. So I've just cut one side out, laid that side on top of some fresh fabric, cut out the second side, lined up the center back seam, pinned, and ready to stitch. And stitching here exactly the same way as I did the center front. Back stitching at the start and the end, taking it nice and easy the whole way down. Off camera finishing off that edge, pressing, and that's my back skirt done. So now to join my two skirt pieces with my bodice. So this is my back. I'm lining up my skirt with my bodice right sides together and pinning. And off camera I've done exactly the same on the front and ready to stitch. Back stitching at the start, at my 1 centimeter seam allowance the whole way across, and backstitching at the end. So that's my back. Same thing on the front. Backstitching at the start. And here I'm taking it nice and easy when I get to that center. I've got a little bit of a curve right at the center and I want to make sure that that's nice and neatly sewn. So that's how that looks. So I've taken care of those seams, pressed, and this is how the back looks, and the front. Super happy with this. So now for the tie detail. So I need to attach the end of my ties to my side seams. So I'm just laying one tie over the other, twisting, lining up the end of the tie with my side seam, making sure that notch in the center of the tie is lined up with the seam between my bodice and skirt, and pinning, and just tacking my tie end in place here for now. So stitching within my seam allowance, backstitching at the start and the end, and that's how that looks. And now for my side seams. So lining up my back over my front at the side seam, right sides together, and pinning, and stitching again at my 1 centimeter seam allowance, backstitching at the start, taking it nice and gently the whole way along that side seam. I want to match the chevrons on the side seam skirt here as well. So just being nice and gentle here the whole way down. Backstitching at the end, and of course I do the same on the other side. So that's my side seams done. So I finished off those seams off camera, giving it a nice press, and while I was at the overlocker, I just ran some overlock stitches along the edge of my hem, pressed it up by my 1 centimeter seam allowance, and pinned. And now just stitching right along those overlock stitches, backstitching at the start, backstitching at the end, and that's my hem all done. So I just need to give that a nice press, and this is how that looks. And now the very last thing I have to do is finish off my armholes. So I'm going to do that in the same way as I did my neckline. So I've just folded one end in underneath and pressed, and I'm lining up that pressed edge with my underarm seam. Lining up my raw edges the whole way around. And then once I come back to the start, I'm just trimming off that excess piping, popping the cut edge into that little fold and running a few stitches over the top. So that's how that looks. And then just like I did on the neck, I'm going to finish off that edge on the overlocker and run a line of top stitching just on the edge of the bodice at the side of the piping. So taking it nice and easy here, trying to stick to a couple of millimeters or so away from the edge of the piping the whole way around. Backstitching at the end, and that's how that looks. Super happy with this. And with that, this little dress is complete. So I have that lovely binding around the armholes and neckline. I've got my twist at the center, got that little lip between my bodice and skirt at the center, and that chevron effect the whole way down. My hem all nicely in place, and on the back, same chevrons the whole way up, and then that lovely bit of finishing around the neck and armholes. And this is how it looks on. So I could not be more pleased with how this has turned out. I love the chevron effect the whole way around. The twist detail at the front I absolutely love. The fit, it's so comfortable. This fabric is super soft, really nice against the skin. I love the V around the neck. I love that it's not too low. I like the width of the shoulder, all of that binding. I love everything about this one.
So I really hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope you found it useful. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you've not yet subscribed, please do, and I shall see you in my next one. Until then, I hope you have a fantastic week. Bye folks!